when the greatest athletes step up in the face of fear, it's not that they don't feel fear. If you study interviews with Kobe and Jordan and even Dame and hear the way that they talk about fear, it's very obvious. They actually experience it a lot like we do. They handle it and they react to it very differently. And the best story that I've come across about this comes from George St. Pierre, who's of course one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time, if not the greatest. And so in the case of GSP, we've got one of the best athletes in history in probably the scariest sport in the world. And get this, GSP himself said that he despised fighting. His exact words were that fighting terrified him. And so in the months leading up to fights, he would be tossing and turning in bed, constantly worried about what his opponent would do to him. In the locker room before the fight, he'd feel like he was going to throw up. And when he finally got into the cage, there was so much adrenaline and fear in his system that he could barely stand it. And it got to the point where he thought about quitting because he didn't know if this was right for him. Teammates and training partners would always say things like, I love fighting. I can't wait to get in there. Fight day is the day I look forward to. And for GSP, he said, that was his least favorite day of the year. He did not want to do it. And so he's questioning, since I feel so much fear around fighting, is this really the path for me? Should I be doing this at all? And he goes to this sports psychologist who gives him this really kind of unsurprisingly generic advice. And I think the sports psych, he said that the sports site gave him this advice to tell yourself that the fear is just excitement. Of course, this didn't work, and George never went back. But he said that when he finally turned the corner in his career as a mixed martial artist is when he realized that the fear was making him a better fighter. In the months leading up to the fight, it was fear that was motivating him to train harder and train smarter and do everything he possibly could to make sure that he won when fight night came. When he was in the octagon, actually in the fight, he said that it was fear that was feeding him with energy, and this adrenaline would actually make his awareness sharper. All of his senses were heightened, and he'd pick up on these little nuances of his opponent's movements and make reads and be able to slip punches much more effectively, all because of fear. And when he finally started to embrace it, he became the fighter that we know today. And funny enough, a little anecdote or side note to this story is that the one fight he said he didn't feel afraid is his first fight against Matt Serra, when he was upset, and Matt Serra, who was a nobody at the time, knocked out GSP, who was a dominant champion, and I think the first or second round, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was this huge upset, and GSP said it was the one fight that he wasn't afraid of. So if GSP, again, one of the greatest athletes in history in the scariest sport that we know of, said that fear made him a better fighter, what can it do for us? That's what a number of neuroscientists at Stanford and Caltech have been studying. And what they're reporting is that, number one, as GSP said, it gives us this huge increase in physical energy. There's so much adrenaline going through our system that it's like getting charged full of energy. Not only that, adrenaline actually is correlated with alertness. And so there's this increase in cognition, in actual sharp awareness, where if you think about when we were evolving as a species out in the wild and we had to contend with all these apex predators, it was fear that made us hyper aware of our surroundings and allowed us to pick up on threats in the environment. So it was critical to our survival. And if you think about fear as heightening and sharpening your awareness on the basketball court, it allows us to pick up on all of these little things as long as we use it effectively, which we'll get into in a moment. Fear, of course, increases our motivation and drive. It's probably the strongest motivating factor that we know of as human beings. And if you look at fear, you'll hear me say this multiple times in this talk, fear is an emotion, which stands for energy in motion. In other words, it's literally designed to make us move, to motivate us in a direction. And so fear, once again, is a strong motivating factor. And finally, really interestingly, fear is directly linked to aggression. So if you think of a cornered animal being the most dangerous type of animal, Fear is what makes us more aggressive. And of course, this can cut both ways. All of these things, increased energy, hyper awareness, sharp, like clear sensory awareness, motivation, aggression. If a player doesn't know how to handle these things, like getting charged with more voltage, and fights against them, it can spin us out. It can make us jittery. The jitters that you feel before games are literally more energy moving through your system that is not moving smoothly because we're fighting against it, trying not to feel it. And so one of my teachers, Bruce Francis, who's a Taoist master, former martial artist who used to do cage fighting for money in Japan. One day we are training and he actually calls fear, that I'll never forget this. He said, fear and strong emotions like fear are free money. So he's speaking, of course, in terms of energetic currency. It's the energetic equivalent of getting thousands of dollars dumped into your nervous system. And there was this double meaning there where he was referring to fear as free money because if his opponent in the cage couldn't handle his fear, that guy was free money. And Bruce knew that he'd be knocking him out and taking home the winner's bonus that night. So fear, if we know how to work with it, can be incredibly beneficial to our performance, but it's not for every player. So how do we unlock the benefits of fear? Well, think about what most players do. And I've been referring to this throughout this talk, but let's get really specific here. When you feel fear, what do you do in your body? Well, the first thing that you do, most likely, if you're like most of us, is tighten up. We don't want to feel it. And we become afraid that we're afraid because in previous experiences, fear made us a worse player. So we start to fear itself. We clamp down with our body to try to restrict the flow of that energy moving through our system rather than opening up and allowing it to charge us. We sort of get this like tunnel vision, right? We're so focused on the fear and trying to get ourselves out of the fear that we spin off into our thoughts about the fear, which of course distracts us from what's happening in the moment, pulls our attention away from the game, and makes us play worse. And to go back to that free money analogy, what most players are doing is freezing all of that free money in an account that they can't access. So how do you unlock the account? Well, ask yourself what's missing here. If fear is giving us more energy, sharper alertness and awareness, motivation, even aggression, what's missing? What's missing is the ability to relax. Most players don't even realize that you can be calm and relaxed in the face of fear. Relaxation and fear are not opposites. Sort of if you imagine yourself in the eye of a tornado where there's all of this swirling energy around you, and yet right in the middle, there's this calm, still point. This is the point that the greatest athletes in history access, and we'll teach you how to do that in this talk. But I'll also point out that basketball is way behind in the art of dealing with fear, and frankly, in mental performance in general. Things like, tell yourself that it's just excitement and these lightweight methods, that's not what we're going to talk about here. If you look at the history of martial arts, for thousands of years, high-level martial artists and even samurai have been working with fear, with very specific techniques for allowing it to supercharge their performance and heighten their awareness and all of the benefits that we just spoke about, but only because they're training themselves to relax in the face of fear. So if we can take the benefits of fear, again, increased energy, sharper alertness and awareness, motivation, drive, even aggression that allows us to assert ourselves on the game and play physical and aggressive, if we can take all of those benefits and then add in the ability to relax, fear supercharges us. It becomes fuel for our greatest performances. And so in our next chapter, we are going to discuss a really powerful technique that I call 3-level relaxation that will allow you to handle the energy of fear a lot more smoothly. And actually, it can even make it feel kind of comfortable for you, surprisingly enough, when you get good at it. In the chapter after that, we'll get into specific training techniques for working with fear that, again, I recommend every player use in their training. These are very, very powerful. So I hope you're excited for this one. I definitely am. We will get into chapter 2 right now, which is using, or rather, I should say, relaxing in the face of fear. Let's do it. Hey, it's Taylor. I hope you enjoyed this clip. And if you'd like to watch the full-length talk, we'll have the title and or link for you in the description so that you can check it out there. And as always, if you'd like to go even deeper, the best place to do that is in our free masterclass over at deepgame.com, which I believe will be the most powerful hour of basketball learning of your life. I hope we see you there.